Greetings, Patriot fans. It's me, Coach Jim Larinaga of the George Mason University Patriots. Hey, we're from the Connecticut Assassination Association. Isn't that great? We're going to the Final Four. And now here on the Fairfax Sports Report, your hosts, Greg Wyshynski, PJ Kluberulis, and Jeff Graham.
Why, thank you, Jim Larinaga. What an honor and a pleasure to have the coach of the Patriots here.
Incredible, incredible. And, you know, to think that they should be on a plane to Indianapolis right now, and he's here with us.
Yes.
For this great, actually, huge Mason show we're going to have
Would
tonight.
you look behind us? There's a ton of Mason gear
ton
there.
of Mason gear,
Mason, all the Mason.
including on yours truly. So
It's amazing.
Pretty impressive to have Coach
It's
L here with us.
amazoning. Anyway, it's a Fairfax Sports Report. Greg Wyshynski, Connection Newspapers, BJ Kluberulis, Connection Newspapers, Jeff Graham, the Connection Newspapers. We have a lot to get to today on the show. Of course, we're going to be talking about George Mason University basketball. There's a lot to get to. We're going to talk about fan reaction. We're going to talk about the prospects for winning the national championship, all kinds of stuff about Mason. We're also going to get into some more spring preview stuff this evening. We were a little pinched for time in the weeks leading up to the spring season, so we're going to get into some baseball, softball, soccer, and lacrosse tonight on the Fairfax Sports Report. Before we get going, I want to thank the folks that make this show possible every single week. We're talking, of course, about the Underwriters. CCI screen printing for all of your screen printing needs, 703-978-0257. And Quality Care Ford Service Center, servicing all makes and models, 703-383-6299. Just a reminder, my book, Glow Pucks and 10-Cent Beer, the 101 Worst Ideas in Sports History, is available at Amazon.com and all of your local booksellers in the area. So there it is. Boys, before we get going, a little bit of news and notes. Want to tell the folks at home that Matt Goff, quarterback of the Robinson Rams football team, is going to be walking on at JMU, probably to be a punter-kicker, according to Coach Mark Bendorf. And that's good news for him. Obviously, I believe Drew Dudzik is going to be the quarterback potentially of the future there for Madison. So
maybe they'll end up rooming together. Who knows?
Could be possible. Could be possible. He'll be responsible for picking up the slack if Dudzik goes 3 and out.
And he can also be an emergency kicker, I guess, if necessary.
That's true. There you go. So good for Goff right there. And you got any other news and notes you want to throw at the viewers? Or?
News and notes. I guess George Mason's in the Final Four. Oh, we can't go to that.
You're getting a glimpse at what our week has been like, living with a Mason boy for the last couple weeks. Let's get right to a really, really big breaking story this week that's got a lot of local implications. And we're talking about basketball, but specifically we're talking about Scotty Reynolds, and not exactly an alien subject on this show, but Scotty is back in the news for a pretty strange reason this week, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we should mention that he's going to be playing tonight in the McDonald's All-American Showcase game. It's at San Diego State University, Cox Arena. It's going to be on ESPN. So, stay with us here. But
no flipping.
I think making the choice between us and seeing Scotty play on a national stage, that's an easy choice, right?
Right.
Stay with us. Okay.
With us, right.
But he's out there with Coach Gary Hall, and they're out basically. He was selected as one of the greatest players in the country to play in this showcase game, and it's supposed to be a big week for him. It's supposed to be a big moment for him, and it's kind of been soured a little bit, I guess you'd say. The major reason that Scotty Reynolds committed to play basketball at Oklahoma University when he was only a junior, he committed early in the spring time of his junior year, was because of Coach Kelvin Sampson, the coach at Oklahoma University, and him and Scotty had quite a bond. And Coach Sampson is going to be taking the job at Indiana University, the mecca of college basketball, and we'll, I guess, debate that a little bit on what would you do in that situation. But that kind of puts our local tie, Scotty, in quite a bind, because he's already signed the dotted line, and he's headed to Oklahoma without the major reason that he was signing to be there. And so Coach Sampson made his decision at about 2 a.m. on Tuesday. Gary Hall found out about 9 a.m. on Tuesday, and he was the one to deliver the news to Scotty. He kind of barged into the practice facility because following the practice at Cox Arena, the McDonald's All-Americans were all going to be going to Media Day, and Scotty was going to find out from reporters. and he didn't want that to happen, and so he walked in and broke the news to him. And I talked to Coach Hall last night, and Coach Hall said that Scotty's reaction was disappointed.
Now, what are his options here? From what I understand, there is a chance that he, could break the agreement with Oklahoma. They might put some conditions on that for him to leave. What are Scotty's options right now if he doesn't choose to play for the Sooners?
According to Coach Hall, the options are he can be let out of his scholarship by Oklahoma, he cannot be let out of his scholarship by Oklahoma, or he can be let out with conditions. For example, okay, you can leave Oklahoma, but you can't go play at Indiana
or Oklahoma State.
Right, or they don't want him basically to come back and bite them for a team that's in their conference. So they could put conditions like that on it. Scotty could choose to play at Oklahoma for a year and then transfer out, sit a year, and go through the whole NCAA process there. But it puts him in a bit of a bind. And this is a kid that had about endless scholarship offers that could have gone anywhere in the country. I mean, he's a McDonald's All-American, 3-time Northern Region Player of the Year. The kid is a special player, and he was promised certain things, and I think Coach Hall said it best. He said, Scotty's learning some valuable life lessons this week, and welcome to the world of big-time college athletics.
Absolutely.
He's not a kid anymore.
Absolutely.
And he's learning that this is what happens.
And Jeff, we've seen this time and time again with athletes that come out of this area, specifically in football, that get recruited by one coach. Maybe at one point during their tenure there, the coach leaves. If you were in that situation, what would you do? I mean, do you think you'd feel betrayed? Do you think you'd feel a certain loyalty to the school that sold you the best bill of goods? I mean, how would you handle that?
Well, I remember, when Hayfield's Mike Freeman a couple years ago, committed to USC, and then it ended up that I guess Coach Bibby left, and he ended up going somewhere else. So it's a weird thing. I know when we've talked about Sampson and Reynolds and their kind of the bond that they felt, it was always kind of seemed that Sampson was the main reason he chose Oklahoma. So you would figure that he might give Indiana a look, and me being an Indiana fan, I would certainly love to see Scotty go play for the Hoosiers, but it's a weird thing now. I mean, we've heard this week that he has a strong bond with some of the recruits that he's going to be going into Oklahoma with, or should be going in with, and if they decide to stay, and stay the course, and maybe Scotty will too. But that's why I think over the next couple of months it's really going to be a weird situation just to see. Maybe what recruit makes the first move and says, "Hey, I'm going to stay." Maybe others will follow. But if somebody leaves, maybe they'll all leave. So it's not a good situation for Oklahoma.
And that's the question too. I mean, I don't think any of us have really pounded the Rivals.com pavement this week to find out what Indiana has coming in recruiting-wise. I mean, who knows how that gets affected? But if they have somebody who would be in the same sort of position as Scotty, someone they regard as being a pretty good prospect, who knows? Maybe he feels as though he would be limited in his first year or two at that school. Obviously, a kid like him, you want to get right in there and play right away, which he would have been able to do at Oklahoma.
I know he was projected to have a really good shot starting at the point guard position. I think Indiana has a couple guards coming in that were pretty highly touted, but it's hard to tell now. If with a player of his caliber. And if Sampson likes him a whole lot, maybe he says, "Hey, I want you to come with me." But it's right now, and we're speaking of Oklahoma, they have some violations that they're dealing with, some sanctions that they're kind of up in the air now. So and those could follow Sampson to Indiana. So it's hard to tell right now what's going to happen.
It should be noted that through my conversation with Coach Hall last night, and he's, like we said, out with Scotty in San Diego, he said that the course of action, according to Coach Hall, will be that they will wait to see who Oklahoma hires. Scotty will sit down with that coach and discuss the future, and then we'll make a decision. So it depends on how fast Oklahoma is going to get on this thing and fill that slot, or maybe when Scotty gets back from this week, he'll make a different decision. But as of now, the plan is to meet with whoever Oklahoma hires, and then to move from there.
And BJ, you've been on this story since it broke. Let's talk about the fact that a certain segment of the Northern Virginia basketball population, i.e. those patriotic George Mason fans were
Right.
very quick to hop on the message boards this
Right.
week and proclaim that Scotty Reynolds would be the starting point guard for the Patriots next
Right.
season. Did you talk to Scotty at all about that sort of thing? or?
It's funny you mention that because I actually spoke to Scotty from his hotel room in San Diego on Sunday. You know, we were just chatting on the phone. I called him because I was putting together a story about George Mason and what their splash in the tournament would do for recruiting local talent. And Mason is known to recruit locally, but not Northern Region blue chippers. I guess they just feel they don't have a chance. Scotty was not particularly hounded like most guys are hounded of his caliber by the local school. They pretty much knew that Scotty was going to leave town and he wasn't going to play for them. So I talked to him, and he was cracking jokes about being a recruit and what it was like. And he did mention that he would never decommit from Oklahoma. And this was Sunday. 2 days later, his world changes. And he goes from cracking jokes about being a recruit, thinking it's all in the past, to having to start that process pretty much over again. And so I think if anybody believes that Scotty's going to come back and play at George Mason, they're crazy. But, you know, he has a long road ahead of him on decisions to make, and I think he'll make the right one. So we'll wait to see, and we'll keep you posted.
There you go. All right, moving on to some of the Northern Region news. Specifically, the spring sports are underway. And it's that great time of year, boys, where you go out and cover a softball game and you freeze.
Right.
Nearly to death, because it is not that really seasonable at night when it's dark out, and it's like 8:30 at night, and it gets to be a little cold. I forgot exactly how cold it gets in the beginning of the spring sports season, and I did not prepare for it in covering a game earlier this week, and I needed some hot chocolate.
Of course, it's tricky because during the daytime you got the sun out, and then you head out at night, and all of a sudden you're freezing.
It's true, because the sun's not there anymore.
Right.
Thanks,
Right.
Greg. Thanks, buddy.
Let's talk a little bit about Northern Region baseball. It seems right now that the team with all the buzz at the beginning of the season are the Herndon Hornets.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, these kids are off to an incredible start, and what we should say about them is that they've beat some teams so far. I think they beat Fairfax. They handled them pretty easily. But the first game on their schedule was Notre Dame Academy, and this is a private school out of Middleburg, in the western parts of Loudoun County. And this is a team that is a private school that brings in talent and is cranking out kids going collegiately every year. So they've got a great coach over there that does a good job over there in Middleburg. And to beat them, they beat them 7-6. I think Daniel Lombardozzi was on the mound for that win, if I'm correct. And he's been really carrying the team. We've heard that name for quite some time in this Northern Virginia area, and he's off again doing wonderful things on the mound for the Hornets. Another guy that we should definitely mention is Ben Kalachi. This is a kid who had a sophomore campaign last year. He hit .324 and scored 12 runs. So he's starting off again with a hot bat. And I believe, I want to say Jason Tate, Tyler Martin is a player that you should definitely look for. He's a senior over at Herndon. Getting my kids mixed up. Tate's a kid on the other side of the camera. But yeah, Tate Swanson is a Herndon senior that you should look out for. So I will pass the mic.
Throwing those names.
Jesus.
I want to mention a kid playing for W.T. Woodson this year. As a sophomore, as a freshman last year, rather, he was an honorable mention all-district player. His name's Jacob Morley. He's a sophomore outfielder this year. Against Marshall on the 28th of this month, a 14-1 victory, by the way, for Woodson in that game. Morley 3 for 3 with a grand slam, 5 ribbies. So he's a kid to watch out for. He was one of the kids that Coach Chris Warren really kind of highlighted at the beginning of the season as being someone he felt could come with a big offensive effort. He was 348 last year with 12 RBIs. So 12 RBIs there last season. He's going to surpass that probably by next week. Right. So a hot start for him. And right now, Woodson, I believe, is at 3-1 so far this season, and looking pretty good. Looking pretty good in the Liberty District.
And how about a little surprise out of South Lakes?
Wow.
3-0 right now. 3-0 in the district, tied with Madison, and they're actually going to be hooking up, Friday in a big game. I would expect Madison to be the favorites in that, but Nick Andrasey for South Lake's big bat and Brian Crawford, their best pitcher. So that's a bit of a surprise. I know the Seahawks struggled last year, and Coach Galvin Morris kind of wasn't very optimistic, sounding at the beginning of the season, but it could have been, that could have been smoke and mirrors right there. But and then T.C. Williams out in the Patriot District, 3-0, giving up only 2 runs so far and scoring 27. So right now, T.C., Lake Braddock, and West Springfield are all undefeated, within the first week 2 of the season. So it's still early on, but some surprising teams.
And it should be noted in the Patriot District that South County and Hayfield baseball hooked up for the first time in the regular season the other night. Hayfield outlasted them 3-2. It was Mark Luther is the coach of South County, of course, coached Hayfield for a number of years, and that'll be a rivalry to watch. And in a sort of old faces and new places kind of thing, you have Lee in the Patriot District right now. They're 0-2 overall, 0-1 in the district, 7 runs for, 22 runs against right now. And then Robinson over in the Concord, they're 1-1, 1-3 overall. So we'll keep an eye on them and how they fare in their first season over in the Concord District.
And then, Oakton starting out 1-2. I know they're dealing with some injuries over there.
Yeah, Curtis Eward just had surgery. This is a kid that's already signed to go play at GW next year. This is a kid that I saw hit 3 home runs over the fence at Westfield last year in one game. 3 in one game. Wow. Over the fence at Westfield.
I remember I was at that game at the complex watching a soccer game. And every couple of innings, I kept turning around and your home run. And you're like, who's that Oakton kid, rounding the bases? Who is it? And it was Eward.
He's just a giant. I mean, the kid played football on the state championship squad over there, but he's out. And I want to say it's a labrum that he had some work done on. But a couple of other kids to mention over at Oakton. Alfredo Rodriguez is a shortstop for them, only a sophomore, and he started every game last year and led the team in hitting. And this is a kid that is definitely going to be a prospect, to look at, for the future. Keith Werman is their catcher. He's also a young guy. He's a sophomore. Scott Rowland working with a lot of youth over there, and it definitely means good things for them in the future. They're only 1-2 to start the season. I think if they had a healthy Chris Despins, who's also, he's faced so many injury problems, and got to feel bad for a kid like that, hasn't been able to do much. I think they're trying to work him in when they can, but you got 2 big guns out in Curtis Eward and Chris Despins. It's really hard to get off to a hot start, especially in the Concord District.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, moving on and checking out the softball side of the world. The game that I covered the other night wasn't a very good game. It was a 17-2 game. And it was Hayfield defeating South County. Hayfield really put a hurt on him, but it wasn't necessarily Hayfield with the bats or anything. They got South County got a feel for him. First year program, their whole team basically comes from Hayfield and from other parts of the county. Al Thompson's the coach, used to be an assistant coach with Hayfield. They get a pitcher named Paulina Gregorovitz, who is the sister of a pitcher on Hayfield. And she's slotted to be the starting pitcher, and it's a very big deal. The 2 sisters are going to face off. They actually had an article in the Metro section of the Post about how you had these sibling rivalries between Hayfield and South County. Well, Paulina unfortunately goes and breaks the pinky on her pitching hand. And Al Thompson, the coach, tells me not only has a broken pinky, but she has a benign tumor in her finger.
Oh my goodness.
It's something where she's broken it before. And he basically said he's shutting her down this season.
Wow.
So right there, you lose your starting pitcher. She's only I think a sophomore, so you obviously want to make sure that you have her for down the road. Their pitching beyond her are girls that haven't thrown before.
Yeah.
And they struggled mightily in that Hayfield game. Hayfield's a team that I'm going to watch them, the Patriot District this year. Like I said, you have Paulina's sister Marilyn, who's going to pitch and hit. You have Alex Bassinger, who's a very steady shortstop and pretty good at the plate. And Katie Thompson, who's the daughter of Coach Al Thompson over at South County, is another player to watch. So they're going to be pretty good in the Patriot this year. I liked what I saw from them. And obviously Ron Giovannucci is one of the better coaches, I think, in the region. He's proved it time and time again.
I think a team watching the Liberties is Stonebridge. Their shortstop, Samantha Ingersoll, is going to North Carolina. Their catcher last year, Kayla Leckler, she set a VHSL record for 8 RBIs in one game against Loudoun Valley, who went on to win the AA state title, and she's back as well. So Stonebridge has been playing well early on, and one of the Concord District teams, I cover Westfield. Linda Pirro is kind of their do-everything player. She's a pitcher. She's a great hitter. Westfield's going to be going up against Oakton, coming up. Oakton, Jessie McCarrick's their pitcher. She's going to be pitching to college, and I think Colgate, isn't she?
I believe so.
So that's going to be a great matchup I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, and Oakton and their crosstown rival Madison will not get a chance to play each other this year, and it's kind of sad to see that, but they've had some changing of the guards over there. Wayne Martin, a Hall of Famer at Madison, was actually just inducted into the Hall of Fame. Great baseball and basketball player at Madison, is taking over as the head coach. Has been a JV coach there for several different sports for a while, but takes over as the head coach of Madison. The district champion from last year, and another district champion is Oakton of the Concord, and they lose their coach. And Pat Purcell, an assistant with the football team and freshman football coach, will take over that program along with his daughter Ashley Purcell, who was quite a star for the softball team and played at George Mason for quite a while. But another team to look for that's up and coming, and I think has kind of caught some eyes, is Herndon. The baseball team is great. Everybody knows that. But there's a special player on the Herndon softball team. Her name's Katie Reinex. She's already pitched 2 no-hitters and 3 shutouts.
Wow.
And so this young lady is somebody to watch, and we'll definitely keep an eye on her for the rest of the season.
Very good, very good. Moving on to soccer, and continuing our kind of look at the spring. You know, it was all truncated. We all had basketball to talk about. We didn't really get around to the spring.
Crummy
I
basketball.
felt crummy about that. I'm glad we're finally hitting it tonight. Again, the Braddock's girls and boys teams, they're always good. And it looks like, yet again this season, we're looking at a boys team that's got a ton of veteran talent, especially scoring the ball, coming back for Coach Joe Seuss. And I think right away, straight away, they're a regional contender without a doubt. And Jeff, you had a chance to look at the Bruins girls last week against Centerville. I know they didn't have the best start, but what did you see in that game that kind of maybe gives you a little insight as to what they might turn into this season?
They started off 1-3, and just looking at, based on scores, not knowing anything behind the scenes, you're like, what's going on? This team went to the state finals last year. They seem to be, returning a strong, strong lineup. But injuries hurt them right off the bat. Stephanie Hilton, one of their top defenders, is injured, and also one of their other top starters is out. But they were able to pull out a win over Centerville, who previously in the week was named the top team in the Washington Post. It's a lot of times that can be the kiss of death, and Coach Warren Williams wasn't real happy that they got the #1 seed. But he said, it's still early in the season. It was a 3-2 loss. A lot of teams, that are in the mix now you're gonna have some losses and some wins down the road, I think. But right now they're just kind of looking to get their legs. I know the first couple of weeks it was real cold out. It was hard to kind of get in the flow of things. So I think some of what you're going to see now is you're going to see some of the better teams starting to play stronger, week in and week out down the road.
Absolutely. And then I would also say that from a Concord District perspective, you talked briefly about Centerville. Robinson moving into the Concord District this year, not only for boys soccer, but more specifically for girls soccer, could have a pretty big impact. You're talking about Jim Reich, one of the longest tenured coaches here in the northern region. They bring back a lot of talent. They lost some scoring, but they bring back some depth. So I think they're going to be able to contend
I think
in the Concord this year.
1 through 4, whoever comes out of that district, I'm just looking at it now. You have Centerville, obviously a strong team. Chantilly, who went to the state finals last year, they lost their best player, Amy Smerzinski. She's playing at Wake Forest now.
Right.
They have a new coach, but they're a strong team. Like you said, Robinson, and Westfield has a veteran team back this year. So I think that district's going to be real strong, going into the regional tournament.
Sounds good. Moving on to lacrosse. Now, boys, interesting thing for the connection this year. We are partnering with Triple Edge Lacrosse to produce a coaches poll every week, and I believe that we have the first incarnation of said coaches poll coming up on the program this evening. Basically, what you pretty much expected on the boys' side so far. I mean, Oakton was leading, as you can see, the leading vote getter in the coaches poll with Woodson, Westfield, Langley. Robinson 5th. You'd usually expect them to be a tad higher, I would imagine, but pretty much what you expect, I think, at this point. Yorktown is off to a pretty good start in the National District. Pretty straightforward, I'd say.
Yeah, Oakton and Robinson actually played earlier this week, and Oakton pulled out a win. Actually, one of my roommates is a lacrosse coach in Prince William. Went to see the game because his game got rained out. Said Oakton, wasn't as impressive as he thought, but obviously they're the defending state champs, so they're going to return strong. And I got the chance to see Westfield and Chantilly earlier this week, and Evan Royster, their midfielder, had 5 goals and 3 assists, and they won 10-4. So he's looking dynamic for the Bulldogs. Westfield's going to be taking on Robinson this Friday, and then Oakton next Tuesday. So you're going to see some of these top teams, tangling with each other. And like we said earlier, in a couple of shows past, I mean, the state title this year is official. So I know in the past few years, it's whoever's won kind of had that that asterisk going next to their name. But I think Oakton, Woodson, some of those teams up there are really aiming to win it this year.
And lingering right outside the top 10 in that coaches poll, by the way, was Hayfield. You see the point total there for Lake Braddock, 24. Hayfield had 21. The next highest was Centerville at 6. So what you're looking at right now, I think, is a top 11. I mean, you have 11 teams that are clearly the elite in the region, and then you have some separation.
And you got a team in Langley there at number 4. It's got a couple of players that have already committed to go and play some lacrosse at the collegiate level, and they take their lacrosse very seriously over there at Langley. Earl Brewer's doing a heck of a job there. They were in the region title game last year, and they lost to Oakton over there in the number 1 spot. Oakton lost quite a few players, but they always seem to reload with Coach Tony Gray over there. I think we're looking at the girls' poll now, but I think we'll see possibly a rematch. If Westfield can't give them a run, we might be able to see Langley pull that off again and get to that title game.
Some of the top teams that you saw last year are the same. So you can easily have the same region semifinals that you did a year ago.
Precisely. And in the girls' side of the bracket, I'm thinking NCAA already. On the girls' side of the poll, Robinson right now has the most points and the most first place votes, and rightfully so. They are one of the more talented teams in the region. I think they're definitely a favorite to win the regional title. They bring back Mary Dunleavy, an attacker, an all-region player. They bring back Katie Delaney in the midfield, who was their assist leader last year. She's going to play at William and Mary. She's a senior all-region player as well. They bring back a ton of talent, especially in the midfield, especially on attack, and they are rightfully on top of the poll right now.
Chantilly actually knocked off Westfield 10-9 on Monday, so they'll probably move up. And Woodson, they lost Ashley McCulloch. They're a great player, but they're still number 3. So I'd expect the Cavaliers to return strong.
And look at Oakton right there on top of Woodson, and Woodson did lose Ashley McCulloch, which really was a nightmare for Oakton in that region title game last year. They had a 9-5 lead, with 13 minutes left in the second period, and Ashley McCulloch scores 3 goals. It's not something they like to remember over there in Oakton, but Woodson did come back and get the 10-9 win right in the last seconds of the game on a last-second goal. So Oakton trying to live that down and come back and possibly be the team that they are expected to be, and you see them ranked higher right now than Woodson.
There you go. All right, and obviously follow the poll not only on this program but in the Connection newspapers each week. Triple H Lacrosse and the Connection kind of partnering up on this effort for the coaches poll. So it should be a good time. I think it's sort of informative. Hopefully we get a few more girls lacrosse coaches participating than they've been in the first 2 weeks, but we'll see where it goes. All right, so evidently George Mason is like in the Final Four or something. Did you know that?
Hey, George Mason, baby. George Mason. That's all I got to say. Let me just get on my stump real quick. For all of you folks in Fairfax that have religiously watched this show, you'll remember a friend of mine that I brought to the show a couple of times this year. I call him Jim Larinaga, the bobblehead. This is a team that I've talked about all year, and I've yelled at you, Fairfax, and I've been mean, and I say, get out there and see these Patriots while you can, because, now, for everything that's happened, those season tickets next year are going to go through the roof. They're not going to be the sweetheart that you ignore anymore. It's the art student turning into the prom queen all of a sudden.
And all she had to do was take off her glasses.
Exactly. So, this is a team now that's legit. They're in your backyard. Get out and support the team. And this is a team that is really put Fairfax on the map, guys. When you think about what they've been able to do in the last couple of weeks, it's been really incredible.
And it's funny you should say that, because you and I both had the opportunity to talk about Mason in a couple of radio interviews with folks from around the country. I think I talked to somebody in Kentucky, you talked to somebody in upstate New York that wanted to know about this school, because they're an X factor.
Right.
No one knew about them.
Right.
And in talking to people from around the country, here are the 2 things that they don't understand about Mason. They didn't know how big the school was. They thought it was a school of like 7,000 kids that somehow hoosiered their way into the tournament. And they also didn't understand why it is Mason doesn't get all of the blue chip players that come out of Virginia. And they don't get the fact that this is a school that competes against Maryland, Georgetown, GW, Virginia Tech, and then if you
UVA.
want to bring them in, North Carolina.
UVA.
Well, I said Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah, Duke.
Yep.
Everybody else in the ACC as well. I mean, that's what you're competing against if you're George Mason. And the folks that are just now discovering the school have no conception about how hard it is for this school to bring in the premier talent from the area and keep them in Fairfax.
And if you're wondering why I'm so amped up about the George Mason thing, it's because I was a George Mason student, obviously.
No.
I covered the team when they went to the NIT 2 years ago. They beat Tennessee, Austin Peay, and were embarrassed on national television against Oregon. But here they are in the Final Four. If you had told me at the beginning of this year that George Mason would be in the Final Four, I would have asked you to kindly check yourself into some sort of treatment program.
Mental facility.
facility.
I mean, this is totally improbable, and I'm getting phone calls from old buddies from Mason, and what it's done is it's really united the community, and it's something that has brought everybody together, whether you went to Mason or not. I mean, look, all the teams from the D.C. metro area are out. George Mason is the team that everybody can root for now, and they're the little guy. Look, we live in an affluent area here where the little guy is often forgotten. And George Mason is pretty much the little guy now, and everybody can root for that team. And they're all little guys. That's the point. I mean, this is a team that gets the little guy. They get the guy that's forgotten about by Maryland. Their entire starting five is from Maryland.
From the Baltimore suburbs,
From
basically,
Baltimore,
yeah.
from Baltimore, and not just the suburbs, but
Yeah,
from
right,
Baltimore.
from Baltimore, yeah.
So they got some hard kids in there, but these are kids that have been forgotten about or not so well recruited by Gary Williams and the big programs, Maryland, GWs, and all them. And you get a kid. It takes one kid. And they had a kid, Fowler Campbell, who could have gone anywhere. He could have gone and sat the bench at Maryland. And he made a decision, and he wanted to be the one guy that went against the grain. And look, he hit the shot in overtime, the fadeaway jumper, if you'll remember that shot, in overtime, to basically put them up against Connecticut and seal that thing up. Will Thomas, the same thing. Will Thomas was forgotten about. Will Thomas is a sophomore forward, the little baby left hook that we saw in that whole tournament that was shadowed by Rudy Gay his whole career. Yet he beat Rudy Gay every time their high schools went at it in high school 7 times. So, I mean, these are kids that are the little guy that are forgotten about. They came together and look what they can do.
And you mentioned little guy. I mean, let's talk about what this team has been able to do in the tournament. I mean, it's not just about some crazy Cinderella fable.
Right.
This team has been able to exhibit a chemistry that I don't think I saw from them in the regular season. And you talk about being the little guy, you're talking Will Thomas and Jai Lewis are 6'7". In the Connecticut game, Mason, those two players out-rebounded Connecticut's Boone and Armstrong 19-9. That's amazing. The rebounding advantages those two players have had against some pretty good talent. Michigan State's big too. They kept it respectable against Wichita State. They kept it respectable against North Carolina, despite the fact that they have a distinct height disadvantage. It's incredible that they've been able to really hang in there against some much taller and stronger players.
And Jeff, Jai Lewis shut down Tyler Hansbrough in the UNC game.
Yeah, I mean, the way that game started out, you thought it was going to be a rout, but then Hansbrough disappeared in the second half, and the way Mason went at it defensively to start that half is really, I think, when at least I started taking notice of them saying, hey, and I mean this team could go on and win it. We were talking about it, going into the Connecticut game. The way Connecticut was playing, why couldn't George Mason win it? I know they're kind of in the back of your mind you're thinking, if Connecticut comes out, maybe this is going to be a blowout, but the way I've looked at Florida and UCLA and LSU, why can't George Mason win this?
And this is a team. I think the most impressive thing about the Patriots in this tournament is the fact that they're not Duke. They're not falling apart if their star falls apart because they don't have a star. It's literally been a different hero every single game.
Right. Yeah,
and it's remarkable to watch, especially in that overtime against Connecticut. And before we go on, let's all agree on something here. We all thought their goose was cooked after it went to overtime. Absolutely.
I'm a Mason fan. I'm going crazy. And the second the kid hits the reverse layup, I looked at my fiance and I said, we just wasted 2 hours of our lives because it's over. UConn's going to come out and be UConn, and Mason's maybe going to crawl back and be little George Mason. But that's the misunderstanding about this team. They've got a hell of a coach, and Jeff, you mentioned it, defense. not a lot of people know that Jim Larinaga actually has a published book, like yourself, Gregory.
Oh, really?
He is a published author.
Fantastic. I'll check
He
his
wrote
Amazon
a book.
ranking.
He wrote a book called The Scrambled Defense, Jim Larinaga's Scrambled Defense. Check it out because it seems to be working, and it's got his team, a bunch of young little underdogs in the Final Four.
All right, we're going to talk about Larinaga in a second, but before we do, let's get to our impossible freaking trivia question for this week, which, by the way, has a little George Mason University bent to it, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and all of our impossible trivia questions tonight, Greg, will be George Mason based, as the rest of this show will be based on George Mason University.
Fantastic.
All right, so impossible trivia, folks. Who was the first Northern Region high school player to sign with George Mason University? And I'll just throw in a little hint, in the last 10 years.
Jeff, do you have any idea who this player may be?
Well, I think Joey Kamad graduated high school within the last 10 years, so I'm going to go with Joey. He's a great basketball player. I've seen him, play myself.
That's fantastic. You'd be the host of Inside Baseball here in the
I know.
Fairfax
You
Sports
think
Network?
you think you go to college for baseball, but he's a closet
Fantastic.
basketball freak.
Can I venture a guess?
Yes.
I remember a kid by the name of Rob Anderson who came out of Wakefield High School in 1998. Is that the answer to the
That is
trivia question?
absolutely the answer. The first
Fantastic.
Northern Region basketball player to sign with George Mason in the last 10 years was Rob Anderson. He was out of Wakefield High School, 1998. I did a story about Mason recruiting this week, and you can check that out on theconnectionnewspapers.com or just pick up your local copy of The Connection. But got a chance to talk to Bill Courtney, who is was the major recruiter. He was an assistant coach with George Mason for quite a while, and he said Rob Anderson was the start of the program. 9 years ago, or 8 years ago was when Courtney got this kid to sign, and Courtney has now moved on with Providence College as an assistant coach as well, but he was with Larinaga for 9 years total. They came from Bowling Green together, and he said Rob Anderson was the start of George Mason University's basketball program, and that's a local product, folks.
Let's talk a little bit about Larinaga now. I'm going to give him a lot of props in a second, but we have to cross this bridge first. There is no question, as much as the Mason people out there, and there are a lot of you watching, I know, you want to believe that Billy Packer and Jim Nance are idiots for saying what they said about Mason not belonging in the tournament. Well, they're absolutely right. From a statistical standpoint and from a gameplay standpoint, at the end of the season, they don't deserve it. You can't lose to Hofstra twice in like 11 days and expect to be in the tournament. They didn't deserve it from that aspect. It doesn't mean they're not a good team. It doesn't mean they're not a talented team. But from the politics of the selection committee, they didn't deserve it. That said, would you agree, Mr. Kubaroulas, that Larinaga is the reason Mason is in this tournament, not from a gameplay standpoint, but from a standpoint that he paid his dues as the coach of Bowling Green and of George Mason, and they cut him a break?
I would not agree with that.
I thought you were going to say he paid off the officials.
I would not agree that Jim Larinaga was paid any sort of service, come join our tournament, Jim, because you've put in your time. If that were to happen, that would have happened in the last couple of years, and it hasn't happened. The CAA has been a traditional one-bid league. You win your tournament, and you're in. And they do not get an at-large bid. Now, this is the first time in 27 years since David Robinson was playing at Navy, and Navy was part of the CAA. This is the first time since before I was born that George Mason or that the CAA has had two teams in the tournament, one with an at-large bid. So I think to say that they rewarded Jim for anything doesn't make sense. What does make sense is that the CAA had 4 teams with 20 wins this year. So you mentioned Hofstra. Well, that's great. Hofstra beat George Mason twice, but there's other in-league games that they split back and forth. Mason dominated the league. They didn't win the tournament, but they dominated a league that had 4 teams with 20 wins each. They had a huge RPI by the end of the year. They won the bracket buster against Wichita State, and they were ranked for the first time in school history in the top 25 poll at number 25, mind you, and they dropped the next game to Hofstra and lost that ranking. But the media splash that they made may have been more important than any sort of Jim Larinaga feel-good story, because most people didn't even know who he was until this week. Not a lot of people knew who Jim Larrañaga was until now, until he's saying the Connecticut Assassin Association and the Kryptonite Kids and all of that. I mean, this is not his style. And I know this from having covered George Mason in my senior year through that NIT run. He's a regular, kicked back sort of guy. Doesn't give you the Hoosiers line. Doesn't give you the let's go out there, kids, and we're gonna win this. They just play the game, and I think he's had to convince these kids that they're bigger than they are, that they're better than they are, and he's got them drinking the juice. That's why they're in the Final Four.
Well, now that I've gotten the fact that Mason's a charity case out of the way, let me say this about Larrañaga. You know who he reminds me of, Jeff? He reminds me
definitely not Gary Williams, because Gary Williams is sitting at home.
Well,
and Larrañaga's in the
plus
Final Four.
Gary Williams is a
he couldn't remind you of Gary Williams by any way. He couldn't remind
Gary
you.
Williams makes about 5 times what Larrañaga makes.
I guarantee you, Larrañaga might make more than Gary Williams by the end of this year when he wins the national coaching award.
When he goes to Oklahoma.
When
Jeff,
he wins the
you know who reminds me? Who Larrañaga reminds me of?
Danny Meyer?
No. Well, it looks like Danny Meyer. It looks completely. We were talking about who's going to play Larrañaga in the movie. He looks like Robinson Principal Danny Meyer. He just does. I think if they make a movie, Ed Harris should play him. I think Ed Harris would be a good choice to play Larrañaga in the movie. Although you said Ron Howard, but he'd have to
older Ron Howard, but
also he'd need a little bit more grass on the pitch, I think too.
But Larrañaga said it himself. Mike Weiss did a column in the Washington Post, and they were talking about who would play who in the movie, and he said he wanted Craig T. Nelson to play him.
Exactly, coach, right?
Kind of cute.
But the thing about Larrañaga that I think has impressed me most, and I want to see if you agree with this, like BJ said, he has become a lightning rod in this tournament. He has become the catchphrase guy, the philosophy guy. He's going to luncheons with the media and doing the whole PR thing. He reminds me of Herb Brooks in 1980. He reminds me of a guy who is a coach that enjoys the X's and O's of the game, but when the time came and he needed to step out of that role and become the focal point of this Cinderella story, he did it. And that's the sort of thing that happens when you have these underdogs doing what Mason's doing this year. You have to have a guy who's willing to be the coach, but also be the lightning rod for the team.
But he's also kind of doing it in a different way than I think, at least Brooks did it, because he was kind of like maybe looked at the media in a more of a negative sense. He didn't talk a whole lot, and when he did, he was kind of more confrontational. Whereas, Larrañaga is just kind of the happy-go-lucky kind of jokey and jovial guy, and that's great to be that with the media, and because a lot of times in these situations you get to deal with coaches who aren't willing to talk, and they don't give you a whole lot, and they're kind of bland. So
coaches like Gary Williams. What?
Gary Williams is home sweating that one.
But if you win the national championship, will you still have an inferiority complex?
Oh, I don't have an inferiority complex at all whatsoever.
Wow.
I mean, we're in the Final Four, and Maryland's out of the NIT, so I mean, it's just really difficult. I mean, for me to have that inferiority complex is impossible. I mean, maybe you as a Terp fan. Possibly.
And judging how many CAA teams have made this sort of run, I'm sure it'll be back next year.
Well, if Gary would give us a game where we could play you guys, I'm sure we could come in the Comcast Center and
Didn't we
play
give you a game a
gym.
few years ago in the tournament?
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
And
well, we had you until the very end. A ball rolled under George Evans' legs, and it's something will haunt me for life. But hey, while we're on being haunted for life, George Mason University's campus life, Greg Wyshynski, has gone through the roof. Throughout this tournament. There have been kids camping out, waiting for tickets, the likes that no one has seen at George Mason University. I emailed a professor of mine on campus today, and he said that there was a pep rally to see the kids off, and that it is probably one of the most incredible things he's ever seen. And this is a professor that was covering the Detroit Red Wings in Michigan as a sports writer during their heyday.
Wow.
For him to say, that this is one of the most incredible things he's ever seen, as I dropped that hockey reference for you, Maya.
I appreciate that.
Selling out T-shirts left and right.
This is amazing because usually most students at Mason can't find the Patriot Center in the winter unless the Foo Fighters are playing there.
Right, or Avril Lavigne.
Right,
exactly. But I mean, the good thing about those kids that are looking for the Patriot Center while walking on campus is that they're not going to get stabbed walking through College Park, which is really a nice thing to have here in the heart of Fairfax. But really, as we talk about campus life, and we've got fraternity kids going crazy, and that's really what it is over there. It's a fraternity, sorority type of life, and to give those other kids something else to do that aren't part of that life, and everybody bonding together has just been incredible. I mean, you're seeing all the reports on the news, and it's incredible to see all these kids come together because it's really. It is a commuter school, and people have called it that, and it's really started to become more than that.
I'm sure if Mason wins, they'll probably have a College Park-esque celebration, but maybe not. You know how hard it is to burn a Chevy Suburban?
It's difficult.
It's very difficult.
It's difficult. I mean, it's a
Roll
little
the
bit,
windows down.
Yeah, I mean, the pay scale's a little bit up, over there at the
it's
University of George Mason.
George Mason. Let me ask you about the Final Four.
Yeah.
Well, actually, let's talk about the final. We'll get to the future of this program, the repercussions from this run in a second. But looking at this Final Four bracket, they've got Florida now in the semis, and then of course they'll get the winner, LSU and then UCLA on the other side of the bracket. How do you see Mason stacking up against Florida?
Look, I mean, if you were to tell me that they'd be even playing Florida now, I'd have to tell you you're crazy to look at the brackets and see how that would happen. We've got Lamar Butler shooting lights out. This kid's the regional MVP, and this is a young man that's a fifth-year senior there. He's had a couple of red shirts, so he's leading them on the outside. You got Jai Lewis, Will Thomas on the inside, Fowler and Campbell and Tony Skinn really rounding out that team. You take them against a team with a guy named Joachim Noah, who looks like he should be playing at Wimbledon, and not in the NCAA basketball tournament. But he is he's 6'9", 6'8". The kid's huge, but it's something that they've fought through. They've been undersized the whole tournament. Look at it this way to put in perspective what they've done. You ask me if they can win, I'll tell you what they've done, and then you tell me, okay? Tom Izzo, Roy Williams, Jim Calhoun.
It's impressive.
I mean,
Don't forget Wichita State's coach.
I don't even know who his name is.
Johnny Wichita.
Yeah, and Johnny Wichita.
Johnny
you don't
Shocker.
forget about him. But somebody else said it best. That's the Mount Rushmore of coaches right there. And you ask me if they can beat Florida, how could I say no? Of course. I mean, look what they've already done. And you can't say that they can't beat anybody at this point.
Now, Jeff, assuming that Tony Skinn doesn't punch anybody in the nuts and they beat Florida, who do you think they have a better shot of beating in the final, UCLA or LSU?
Well, LSU's a 4 seed coming out of the Duke bracket, but right now they're playing like the 1 seed. And UCLA, we saw them against Gonzaga. They probably should have been gone there. They're a young team, so I think LSU's probably playing better than anybody right now. So I mean, I think that would be a great matchup. But I mean, George Mason, they're not going to pick their opponent. They're saying, give us anybody, we'll take them on right now.
I happen to agree with you that LSU is. I think that I would be scared to death to play them in the final. I think they're playing out of their minds right now.
Probably the only kid bigger than Jai Lewis is baby Shaq for
big
LSU.
Baby. I think that LSU. I mean, the only. I think we talked about this. If you had Mason and LSU in the final, it's like, can Cinderella beat Katrina?
Yeah.
I mean, those are the two storylines we're dealing with, and sometimes the team with the best storyline seems to win. Yeah. And LSU, I think, has a great story, just like George Mason has a great story. That to me is the most compelling final. I don't know if we're going to get it. I think that UCLA has a very good chance to beat LSU because of the defensive style they play. And I don't have a feel for this Florida Mason game. After Mason beat Connecticut, I think all bets are off. Yeah. I don't think you can possibly predict how they're going to play, especially how they're going to play away from D.C. You can't underestimate the fact that the energy in that crowd and the energy in the community really propelled them in those last two games in the D.C. bracket. So you have to kind of wonder when they go to Indianapolis. Completely different environment, completely different living conditions, completely different fan support, how they're going to react in that game against Florida.
And they've played 32 games right now in this season. They're 25-7. So this is not a team that's used to playing 32 games in a season, you know. And so I wonder if once they leave home and then you don't have the fans there amping them up the whole way through, I wonder how they're going to be able to really fight this thing out. I mean, look, there's only 2 games left if they could get that far, but maybe it is a bit deflating being away from home. But I know there is a huge contingent of Mason fans that will be traveling up to Indianapolis.
We got another impossible trivia question, Mason-based. Let's take a look at that now. And Mr. Kubaroulas, the question is?
Well, gentlemen, what local high school director of student activities still holds records with the George Mason University basketball team? And I'll give you a hint. It's the women's basketball team.
Interesting. What's the answer there, Mr. Kubaroulas?
Jeff Graham, care to take a stab?
I was going to say Pat Henthorne, but it looks like I was a little too early.
Well, Linda Jones, you had the school right, but just the wrong person. Linda Jones is the South Lakes High School Director of Student Activities, and she was a guard at Mason from 81 to 85. She led the Patriots in scoring in her senior season with 500 points, and her average was 17.9 points a game. She's also second all-time in career assists with 500 and third all-time in career steals. And her point total is best for 13th all-time still. And that was a little while ago. So Linda Jones, quite the baller in her heyday.
There you go. Getting back to the Cinderellas from George Mason for a second, what do you think this run means for the program? What are they going to be able to do to build off it?
Well, I mean, it's cute to call them a Cinderella, and they've been that through the tournament, and they're willing to be that. But, you know, I think that a lot of people may not realize that they've got talent. And I think this may be the beginning of something. I don't think this is going to be a one and done, see you later, you were a real cute story while you lasted. I think they're going to be able to compete now. Talking to Bill Courtney, who was at Providence College now and was with Larinaga, is also a graduate of Lee High School, was in the state title game in 81, I believe it was, or 88. Courtney is a local guy that knows the local scene and knows that Mason will be able to get their foot in the door with higher caliber of recruits. So I think it's a start of something, Jeff, that would be able to carry for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't over exaggerate how far I think they go. I mean, I don't think you're going to see them, get back to the Final Four. I mean, they could, but I wouldn't see it within the next few years, just based on how many good programs there are.
Right.
But I do think it's going to help with recruiting. I mean, this type of run. Maybe not this year, whereas because of a lot of the recruits have already committed. But maybe next year, if they could put together another good season, you're going to have kids from maybe around here, maybe from elsewhere, from up and down the East Coast, really kind of look at them as a viable option.
I think that they're definitely going to have their foot in the door with local talent. But I think the one thing that will continue to be a disadvantage is exactly what makes them charming, which is the fact that they are a mid-major, that they are a CAA team. They can't go to a kid like Georgetown can and say, if you come and play here, you're going to play in the Carrier Dome and you're going to play in Madison Square Garden. They can't come to a kid like Maryland can and say, if you come here, you're going to play in North Carolina and you're going to play in front of the Cameron Crazies. That's an incredible selling point. And that's the reason those big schools keep pulling in talent, is because they can offer a certain amount of star factor, if you will, a little bit of fame, if you will, that the mid-majors can't offer. As sexy as Mason is right now as a program, having made this run, you can't tell a kid, oh, by the way, guess what? You get to play at Old Dominion. It doesn't have the same impact as you get to play in Madison Square Garden against St. John's.
But I think it's also an advantage, too, that maybe they're going to get the kids that are going to stay the 3 and 4 years, whereas the kids that go to North Carolina, they're 1 and 2 and done. The kids go to Connecticut, 1 and 2 and done. Like, I mean, you see it all over, and I'm glad the NBA kind of put that rule in where you have to be 19 now to go in. But I think with this kind of college setting now, whereas you're going to see a lot of the top recruits go to the big schools and then leave after 2 years, you're going to see some of these mid-major teams be competitive like they were this year. Maybe more so in the past, whereas 10, 15 years ago, the same 8, 10 teams were going to the Sweet 16, Elite 8 year in and year out. Where mid-majors, I didn't even know what a mid-major was 10 years ago or 8 years ago. Now you're going to see some of these kids like Jai Lewis. They're going to get some of the kids that are of his caliber or maybe better, and they're going to stick around 3 or 4 years, and they're going to keep these teams competitive.
I don't expect to see George Mason in the Final Four, maybe ever again. I don't know. It's been a crazy ride, but I'll say this: being a big fish in a small pond does have a good little ring to it for some kids that want to go and maybe aren't the greatest D1 major program prospect, but for a kid like a Fowler and Campbell, he's a big fish in a small pond, and I think he'd be sitting the bench at a lot of the other major programs. And like Jeff said, I think the age restriction from the NBA has really helped college basketball, and we're seeing that now in a mid-major program that's got a bunch of seniors and a team that's been together for a while under tutelage of our boy Jim Larinaga.
Absolutely. And I give you a bunch of grief, mainly because I'm just a jerk that way. But I mean, it's been a great ride. I mean, there's no denying that this has been an incredibly exciting and wonderful story, and I don't think there's anybody up here or in this room, there's only one other guy in this room, but I think he'll agree that none of us would be upset if Mason won this thing and completed what's been a completely awesome fable so far through the tournament. And being that it's a fable, let me ask you this, BJ. Is this the biggest upset? Do you think the Connecticut game was the biggest upset in tournament history?
I think maybe not just that game. I think maybe you have to take it as a whole. I think maybe you have to look at every game and say maybe this is the biggest upset run in the history of the tournament, or maybe even in the history of sports. And I know I'm really going out on a limb there, and you can see the words on my shirt. I'm obviously biased here, but this is a team that was a bubble team. It wasn't even supposed to be in the tournament. Was told they shouldn't be in the tournament when they got into the tournament. So I think if you look at it from that perspective and you see what they went through, the caliber of programs they went through, and the caliber and big-name coaches, big-name prospects that they went through, Rudy Gay is going to be possibly the #1 pick in the NBA draft. I mean, you look at Izzo, like I mentioned earlier, and Williams, and Calhoun, and you look at those factors. I mean, how can you not say it's the biggest upset in the tournament's history?
Jeff, I think the only thing missing from this run for Mason is the fact that they don't have a Goliath in this tournament. I think that you have some schools that in name only are dynamite schools for them to play. If they play UCLA in the final, it's a real fitting finale because you have the George Mason Patriots against the most storied program in NCAA history, but not necessarily a team that is deserving of that title.
Yeah, I mean,
so what they're missing is a team like Carolina last year or UNLV from years past, the team that really everyone says in a consensus kind of way, that's the team that's going to win.
Yeah, I think you're going to see that from now on. I don't know if you're going to see those really dynamite teams like when Villanova beat Georgetown. I mean,
yeah.
When you look at some of ESPN was doing that whole who's the best
Right.
team. All of them are the teams of the past.
And talk about upsets. NC State beating that Houston team with
right.
Olajuwon.
I think
Drexler.
I think when you look at the upsets, you look at the Villanova team, the NC State team, and then if Mason can do it, they're not maybe the lowest seed, but I think if you think of Villanova, NC State, you think of them now in higher regard than George Mason. Guys are on TV now pronouncing George Madison, James Mason. They can't even get the name right. So I mean, if they win, I think this would be the biggest upset in basketball history in the entirety of
but
it.
what about sports history? Cooper Willis is willing to go sports history. Are you?
1980 men's hockey team in the Olympics.
I think I'll agree there. I'll take a step back and say that beating the Russians was a lot more difficult than Lamar Butler shooting threes over Rudy Gay.
Although in both cases they had a home court or ice advantage, sort of similar. Well, it's true. You had a home court advantage. That's why you beat Connecticut.
Okay.
You don't think so? I think it was pretty clear.
Well, the court wasn't taking the shots.
It's true, and neither was Connecticut.
Connecticut stunk it up the whole tournament.
All right, folks, want to let you know what's coming up here on the Fairfax Sports Network. All kinds of good stuff coming your way, including the FSN Game of the Week. This week, South Lakes at Madison. See our website for the schedule, Cox, Comcast, Verizon, Channel 10, Baseball, FSN Game of the Week. www.fairfaxsportsnetwork.com is the website you need to visit for all sorts of news, information, and, of course, a stunning photo gallery. I want to thank you, CCI Screen Printing, for all of your screen printing needs, 703-978-0257. And thank you, Quality Care Ford Service Center. You service all makes and models, 703-383-6299. And there's my book again, Glow Pucks and 10-cent beer, the 101 worst ideas in sports history. And it's on Amazon and a local bookstore near you.
Just read the chapter about our boy taking the ice. The 7-footer.
Oh,
Manute
Bol.
Man, getting in between the pipes.
Manute Bol playing hockey.
Actually never got out on the ice.
Never got out on the ice. Arthritis kicked
swelled
in.
up.
Arthritis kicked in. You know it. Come here. Come on. Go hug it out.
No. Here, I'll high five
All right,
you.
fine.
I
Thank
don't-
you.
Friends don't let
You just
men hug
cursed
friends.
yourself.
Thanks for watching, everybody. It's been a very tense 2 weeks because thank you. I can't tell you how many battles you've witnessed on the air today have occurred every single waking moment of our lives.
That's all I gotta say right there.
I think Mason's going to win this game, and then they're going to lose to LSU.
I was going to say the same thing.
And you?
Are you really asking me that?
Yeah, I am asking
Because
that.
I
What
just
do you
gotta
think's
keep
gonna
doing
win?
Did you get that
this.
shirt when you were a freshman?
George Mason, man. Jim
There he is.
Larinaga, the Kryptonite Kids.